For years, the three most powerful AI companies in the world made a point of telling you what their technology would never be used for. Google's AI principles explicitly stated the company would not pursue applications in weapons or surveillance. OpenAI maintained usage policies that restricted military and warfare applications. Anthropic, structured as a public benefit corporation, built its entire public identity around a single idea. Some uses of AI were simply off the table, no matter who was asking. Then February 2026 happened. On the 28th, OpenAI reached an agreement with the US Department of War, the name the Trump administration had restored to what had been called the Department of Defense, to deploy its models onto classified military networks. The same day, multiple outlets confirmed that Anthropic would legally challenge the federal government, not because it had done something wrong, but because it had refused to do something the Pentagon demanded. Here's the 48 hours that led there. Pentagon gave Anthropic a deadline, 5:01 p.m. on a Friday. Remove two specific restrictions from your government contracts, a prohibition on mass domestic surveillance and a prohibition on fully autonomous lethal weapons, or face consequences. Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei responded publicly, "We cannot in good conscience accede to their request." Within hours, President Trump directed every federal agency to cease using Anthropic technology. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth designated the company a national supply chain risk, a legal mechanism normally reserved for foreign adversaries infiltrating critical defense infrastructure. Google, for its part, had already made its move, quietly. More than a year earlier, in February 2025, the company removed its long-standing commitments not to develop AI for weapons or surveillance from its published AI principles, with no equivalent policy replacing them. Every single one of those promises is now gone. Not quietly retired, not replaced, just gone. Somebody decided that. And it's worth figuring out who and why now. To understand how we arrived at February 2026, you need to go back 3 years, because what happened was not a sudden policy shift or a single executive's decision. It was the final stage of a pipeline, one the Department of Defense had been building piece by piece since 2023. It started with a memo on August 10, 2023. The Deputy Secretary of Defense formally established something called Task Force Lima, a dedicated unit within the Chief Digital and AI Office, chartered to explore the operational potential of generative AI and large language models across the department. The framing was still cautious. The mandate included identifying safeguards and mitigating risks. But the word that mattered was explore. The institution had decided it was going in this direction. The question was only how fast. The answer came in December 2024. The department launched the AI Rapid Capabilities Cell, structure built not for exploration, but for acceleration. Its published documentation cited $100 million in funding across fiscal years 2024 and 2025. Multiple generative AI use cases already in development. The language of caution that had characterized Task Force Lima was largely gone. The language of speed had replaced it. 1 year after that, Defense Scoop reported that the department was rolling out GenAI.mil, a centralized platform designed to deliver commercial AI models to what the reporting described as almost the entire DoD workforce. 3 million personnel, military, civilian, and contractors. By February 2026, the Pentagon was tracking over 1.1 million unique users on the platform. This was no longer a pilot. This was infrastructure. Then, on January 12, 2026, the department released its formal AI strategy memo. The document directed the department to become an AI-first warfighting force. Among the pace-setting projects it identified was something called the Agent Network, designed to support decision-making across what the memo explicitly described as campaign planning to kill chain execution. That phrase deserves a moment. Kill chain execution is a technical term in military doctrine. It refers to the full sequence of steps, from identifying a target to taking lethal action against it. Its appearance in a procurement document, in the same taxonomy used to justify vendor onboarding timelines, is not incidental. It is the strategic direction written plainly in an official government publication. When AI companies began negotiating government contracts in 2025, they were not entering a blank relationship with an agency exploring new technology. They were being pulled into a system that had already been designed, funded, and given a mandate. And the terms of that mandate were already in writing before anyone signed a contract. Before framing any of this as a story of corporate resistance, it's worth looking at what these companies actually did in the 18 months leading up to the confrontation. These companies didn't stumble into the defense market, they sprinted toward it. By July 2025, the Pentagon had signed parallel contracts with 4 AI vendors at once: Anthropic, Google, OpenAI, and xAI, each deal worth up to $200 million. Same structure, 4 different companies. That's not how you pick a partner. That's how you build a bidding war. Then, Anthropic did something that tells you everything you need to know about how this game is played. In August 2025, Reuters reported the company was offering its flagship AI, Claude, to the US government for $1. Think about that. A company valued at hundreds of billions of dollars was giving its product away for $1. Not because they're charitable, because in Washington, the first mover wins. Get embedded in enough federal agencies fast enough, and you become impossible to replace. By the time the contract disputes went public in early 2026, Defense One was already reporting that removing Claude from defense systems could take 3 months or longer, and some sources put it closer to a year. The hook was in deep, and the money involved is not abstract. We're talking about companies that are now valued in the same range as the largest banks in America. OpenAI, Anthropic, household names, but one of their fastest growing and most strategically important customers isn't your college kid using ChatGPT. It's the US military. And when a customer that size sets the terms, everybody at the table knows it. This is what the all lawful uses dispute was actually about. The 4-vendor parallel structure gave the Pentagon something it would not have had in a single vendor relationship: credible substitution. If one vendor declined revised terms, 3 others were already under contract, already familiar with the classified environment, already positioned to absorb the workload. The market design was the negotiating tool. So when you hear late February 2026 described as a government crackdown on an AI company that refused to compromise its ethics, that framing is accurate. It's also incomplete. It leaves out the prior 2 years in which that same company worked aggressively to become as embedded in federal systems as it could, and in doing so, made its own position significantly harder to defend. Here's where the story gets harder to tell, because what AI is actually doing inside these systems, not in press releases, not in strategy memos, but in real operations, almost no one outside classified environments can see. The central problem with evaluating how AI is actually being used inside the US military is simple. The most operationally significant deployments are classified. The contracts are classified, the use cases are classified, the outputs are classified. What surfaces in the public record are fragments, procurement announcements, partnership press releases, and occasionally a piece of reporting that the system was not designed to make visible. In mid-February 2026, the Wall Street Journal reported that Claude had been used during a January operation involving Venezuela's leadership. Reuters, covering the same story, stated explicitly that it could not independently verify the claim. That distinction matters for evidentiary purposes, but it doesn't eliminate the significance of the allegation. If accurate, it would mean a frontier AI model had already been deployed in an active military operation, one that would almost certainly fall outside the use case boundaries. Anthropic had defined in its vendor terms before the public dispute over those terms had even started. Here's why the claim is hard to dismiss. In November 2024, Anthropic and Palantir announced a partnership, making Claude available on Amazon Web Services for US government intelligence and defense operations. Palantir is not a cloud provider in the conventional sense. It is an operational integrator whose platforms sit inside some of the most sensitive decision support systems in the US government. Once a model is available through that channel, the vendor's ability to monitor or restrict its end use is constrained by the architecture itself. Anthropic writes a usage policy. Palantir deploys the model within a larger operational stack. What happens at the point of use? Who is responsible under which standard? becomes, at minimum, an open question with no clear answer. The same blind spot applies to OpenAI's December 2024 partnership with Anduril. Anduril builds autonomous systems. The partnership's focus, counter-drone platforms, involves AI functioning not as a standalone interface, but as a component inside a weapon system. At that level of integration, the terms of service that govern model access at the API layer simply do not reach into the operational environment. No visibility into what inputs the model receives. No mechanism to audit what actions follow from its outputs. The contract exists between OpenAI and Anduril. What happens downrange is outside of it. That phrase, kill chain, execution, isn't abstract when it appears in a procurement document. It means AI systems are being built into the full sequence of steps that ends in lethal force. And that construction was already underway, with vendor models already embedded before anyone in the public conversation had started asking whether it should be. Terms of service are enforced at the API layer, at the point of model access. Beyond that layer, inside classified systems, inside weapons platforms, the gap between what a company says its model will not do and what it is actually being used for is structurally unauditable. There is no mechanism for the vendor to know. There is no mechanism for the public to know. The dispute between Anthropic and the Pentagon came down to two clauses. Anthropic's government contracts contained explicit restrictions on two categories of use: mass domestic surveillance and fully autonomous lethal weapons, systems capable of selecting and engaging targets without meaningful human oversight. The Pentagon's argument, reported across Reuters, The Washington Post, and AP, was simple. The only thing that should tell the military what it can't do is a law passed by Congress, not a company's terms of service. Anthropic's counter was equally simple. Some things the model shouldn't be used for, period. Legal or not. No contract could change that. The negotiation ran through the third week of February 2026. Then, on the morning of the 27th, it ended. The government set a deadline. 5:01 p.m. that Friday. Sign or get hit with two things. The first was a wartime law that most Americans haven't thought about since World War II, the Defense Production Act. It's the same authority that let the president tell Ford and GM to stop making cars and start making tanks, dusted off and pointed at a Silicon Valley AI company. The second was a designation, the kind normally reserved for Chinese telecom firms suspected of feeding data backed to Beijing. The legal equivalent of calling Anthropic a foreign spy. Not an exaggeration. That is functionally what the label means. The deadline passed. Anthropic didn't sign. Both threats were executed immediately. President Trump directed all federal agencies to cease using Anthropic technology. Secretary Pete Hegseth formally designated Anthropic a supply chain risk. Emil Michael, the department's undersecretary and chief technology officer, went further, posting publicly that Dario Amodei was, in his words, a liar with a God complex, and arguing that it was not democratic for a private company to impose policies above and beyond what Congress has passed. Think about what that argument is actually saying. A private company put two safety restrictions in a contract, and the government's position was, that's undemocratic. Not illegal, not dangerous, undemocratic. Because Congress hadn't specifically prohibited those things, no company has the right to refuse them. If that logic holds, it applies to every vendor, every contract, forever. Legal experts weren't buying it. Lawyers at Lawfare, one of the most respected national security law publications in the country, called the move extreme and pointed out the obvious. This designation was designed for companies like Huawei and Kaspersky, foreign actors, hardware with backdoors, software tied to adversarial governments. The statutes use words like sabotage and subversion, hostile acts meant to compromise system integrity. Applying that label to a US company for refusing to remove a contract clause is, as Lawfare put it, categorically different. The lawfare analysis also made a broader point that cuts deeper than the legal question. The rules governing military AI are currently being set through backroom contract negotiations between a defense secretary and a startup CEO, with no democratic input and no framework that survives the next change of administration. Anthropic's lawyers argued the secretary had no legal authority to stretch that designation beyond Pentagon contracts. It couldn't reach into what Anthropic did with any other client. None of that resolved the immediate operational reality. Within 24 hours of Anthropic's designation, Reuters reported that OpenAI had reached a separate agreement to deploy its models on the same classified networks that had been the subject of the dispute. The replacement was arranged before the legal challenge was filed. What February 27th established is a template. A company refuses to remove its own ethical limits from a government contract, and in response, it gets branded a foreign spy risk, cut off from every federal agency overnight, and replaced before it can file a single legal challenge. No wrongdoing required, just the word no. The Pentagon's official response to the public controversy was brief. The department had no interest in mass domestic surveillance, no interest in fully autonomous lethal weapons. A spokesperson described the broader narrative as, in their words, fake. That position is worth testing against the department's own documents. DoD Directive 3000.09, updated in January 2023 and still in force, establishes the department's baseline policy on autonomous weapon systems. It requires that such systems be designed to allow appropriate levels of human judgment over the use of force. It mandates senior-level approval for certain autonomous weapon classes. The directive does not prohibit autonomous lethal systems outright, but it draws a clear institutional line between human-supervised and fully autonomous engagement. Now read the January 2026 AI strategy memo from the same department. It directs the creation of an agent network, AI agents supporting decision-making from campaign planning to kill chain execution. That language does not appear in a footnote or an aspirational annex. It sits in the project taxonomy used to categorize pace-setting initiatives and justify procurement timelines. The department is simultaneously maintaining a policy requiring human judgment over the use of force and publishing a strategy describing AI agent networks operating across the full kill chain. Whether those two things are compatible depends entirely on how you define the terms, and neither document defines them with the precision required to resolve the contradiction. That gap is not an oversight. It is precisely where the all lawful uses argument lives. Define autonomous narrowly enough, define human judgment loosely enough, and both documents coexist without formal conflict. Reuters, reporting on the classified deployment push, warned that expanding AI into these environments with fewer standard restrictions could increase the risk of serious errors, including lethal outcomes. That assessment came from a mainstream wire service, sourced from within the government itself, not from a vendor or a civil society organization. Inside the AI companies, something else was happening. Employees at Google and OpenAI, competitors to Anthropic, published an open letter under the name "We Will Not Be Divided." The letter identified the government's strategy directly. They're trying to divide each company with fear that the other will give in. The next line was precise. That strategy only works if none of us know where the others stand. The next line was precise. That strategy only works if none of us know where the others stand. That's not one alarm going off. That's 3 independent alarms. From the department's own policy documents, from government insiders speaking to Reuters, and from employees at competing AI companies, all pointing at the same gap from different positions at the same time. And a set of official government statements that don't engage with the substance of any of them. As of the end of February 2026, Anthropic has signaled its intention to challenge the supply chain risk designation in court. The legal questions are real. What limits, if any, the executive branch has when it turns wartime procurement tools against a domestic company that simply refused a contract demand? But while the lawyers work, Claude is still running inside defense and intelligence systems that would take months to replace even if the government wanted to. The punishment and the dependency are both in effect simultaneously. The vendor that stepped into the gap, xAI, brought its own complications. The Wall Street Journal had reported that internal government concerns about Grok's reliability and safety were documented before the Anthropic dispute concluded. Those concerns did not prevent the classified deployment agreement from being signed. Availability and compliance were the requirements. Everything else was secondary. And Google had already resolved its own position on this question a year earlier, quietly, without a public dispute, by removing the commitments that would have made one necessary. Here's what the full picture looks like. Anthropic held 2 lines and was designated a national security risk for it. OpenAI moved into the gap within 24 hours, describing the arrangement as consistent with its safety principles. Google had already eliminated the policies that would have required it to make any choice at all. xAI signed without public objection, despite documented concerns about Grok's behavior in contexts far less sensitive than classified military networks. 4 companies, 4 different calculations, none of them straightforwardly the protagonist. And that's precisely what makes this story matter, because it means the outcome here wasn't determined by any single company's principles. It was determined by the structure of the market those companies helped build. The precedent established on February 27th is not specific to Anthropic. It is available to apply to any vendor in any future negotiation where the government determines that a company's ethical restrictions are an obstacle to its operational requirements. The mechanism has been used. It has not been successfully challenged. The AI systems now shaping military decision-making are already deployed, already integrated, and operating in environments that neither the public nor the vendors themselves can fully observe. So here's the question this whole story leaves you with. Not, was Anthropic right? Not, is the Pentagon evil? Those are the easy ones, and they're also beside the point. The real question is structural. If the only entities with any power to set limits on AI in warfare are the vendors themselves, and the government has now demonstrated clearly what happens to any vendor that tries, then there are no limits. There's just the next negotiation, and the one after that. Congress hasn't acted. The courts haven't ruled. The companies that tried to hold a line have been shown exactly what it costs. So who decides where this stops? And is anyone actually in a position to? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every one. And if you want to see the next one when it drops, subscribing is the only way to make sure you do.